Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of Gotta Go Slow, looking at tracks that are 100 BPM or less. Today we're going to be looking at a band called Skepticism. The track is The Departure. Let's see what Skepticism is bringing to the table today. Ooh, we got ourselves a fuzzy mallet. Pretty much just fry right there, just really getting into that low crackle. We're looking at about 58 BPMs right here just to start the song off of. Interesting putting those 16th notes in the guitar idea. Giving it a little bit of kick, a little bit of momentum, without drastically changing the vibe. Very theatric with this organ. Interesting, we shifted up to about 75 here. It feels like it wants to rush so bad. I keep thinking that we have an accelerando going, and we don't. We keep returning back. Although we are up to a 90. Yeah, right here with the heavy use of toms and snares. Listen to how we get the boom of the hits, but not so much the crack at the beginning. Yeah, that's where the mallets come into play rather than using drumsticks. I didn't catch the time signature there. But I think we were in 7, alternating groupings of 4 and 3. I'd have to go back to check though. It very much feels like a funeral when we hit these sections though. I noticed they have a traditional drum right there too. Kind of impressive how on the nose they are with all these tempo shifts. Hmm. All right. Interesting stuff here. Primarily because it's very different from what we've checked out this week. What do we have? Oh, we had Conan and we had Yob, and both of those, I talked about a. Both of the songs kind of gave me this lumbering husk, a large entity, powerful, something powerful in that regard. Single-minded, very focused, one foot in front of the other, going to do a single task. Right. This is very different. The atmosphere and story that I get here is a reluctance to move on. It's the opposite of an inability to stop. This is a song that wants to stay where it is. It doesn't want to keep pushing forward. It's a very different use of the very slow tempo. I think part of that, though, kind of stems from the idea that musically, chordally, a lot of this feels very funerally. It feels melancholic. It feels downtrodden. It's just not a happy song. And neither were the other two that we checked out. But they were more of an aggressive slowness, where this is a reluctant slowness. And that reluctance pairs well with that melancholy, more so than an aggressiveness or single-minded focus on revenge or something. Uh, and it's just very cool to see the same technique being utilized in a completely different texture here, or a different setting, where it's telling a very different story, at least to me. Now, part of this different storytelling is going to come from the chord stuff, which I've already talked about. It's I wish I knew what chord progression this was, so I can just point it out, but that's not my forte. My ears aren't, uh, they're not good like that. There's definitely some composers that do these reactions out there. Um, Music Hut, I think, is one of them. Daily Doug, they can just pick this up and be like, that's this chord right here. And like, I wish I had that skill. I do. Um, but that's not my forte. But there is something very, um, moody, very theatric about the chord progression itself. Um, it's not it's not 100% melancholic. There's that third chord in there that is a bit of an uplift before we resolve back down to our uh, sort of a neutral resolution before pulling into the more melancholic opening chords of our progression. And this little idea, this, very sad, very theatric, very moody, into a bit of an uplift back into that moody theatricality, paired with the organ, kind of give it a very choiristic kind of thing, very I don't know, sort of hymnic. The types of chord you would hear in like a Catholic or a church or a Christian church setting, but paired with the organ and the first two chords specifically that kind of give it that melancholic vibe. Instead of a church like a praise setting, it's church like a funeral. I think that's the pathway that my mind went to land on the funeral vibes. Is that it's very churchy, but it's not bright and praisey kind of church stuff. It's downtrodden church stuff, and I typically associate that with funerals. Um, and so this brings about a completely different vibe, like I mentioned, with the tempo. the tempo's slow because, at least to me, it feels like it doesn't want to push forward. It's either wants to exist within the sorrow that it's in, maybe it finds a joy in the sorrow, or maybe it just doesn't know how to move on outside of this and to continue on with life past this death or this failure or something. There's definitely some negativity associated here. And yeah, that's like everything about this track to me, wrapped up in that idea right there. Um, I want to talk about real quick the drums. First thing I saw in the video, the dude has fuzzy mallets. And there's something very cool about mallets versus drumsticks that you just typically don't see in metal because it doesn't lend itself well. And it entirely has to do with attack. So, attack is the initial sound that you hear. Whether it's the moment where the air breaks through the instrument and you get the first bit of tone before the player can resolve it down into a very neat sound, or it's the first hit on a percussion, that first initial texture that you get when you first hit it before the sound resonates. That is our attack. With a drum stick, you're going to get a very sharp attack off of it. With a mallet, especially one with so much padding around it, you're going to get a very soft attack, almost no crack at all. And when he shifted to that tom run, I tried to point it out. I gave like 3 or 4 repetitions for you to hear before I commented on it. I hope you kind of understood what I was speaking about there, but instead of like drumsticks on a snare, I tend to envision as a k sound. It's a very sharp, harsh K, right? And even talking about it, when I talk about when the stick hits the snare, I call it a crack, and it sort of works as an onomatopoeia because it's a very sharp initial hit. This was more of a very light hit. In fact, when he was utilizing the mallets on the toms, it sounded more like a timpani. Well, timpanis use mallets, which is probably why. Timpanis also have a very wide drum head, so it's a lot more space for it to reverberate and to absorb the impact. So you get more of the rumble, less of the initial hit. But yeah, so like those tom rolls weren't like da 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 da. It was like do 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 do. It was just a very smooth roll. And so it creates a drumming style, at least acoustically, that to me feels more like legato playing. It feels looser and more connected rather than sharper and distinctly spaced between hits. And it creates this fluidity in the drumming that I think sounds beautiful. But also, when you remove that harshness, you end up with a very smooth sound that underlines the rest of the music. In fact, there really isn't a lot of harshness at all across here. When we look at the guitar playing, the organ playing, and even the vocals, there's very few moments where we have very harsh attacks. In fact, a lot of this, now that I'm thinking back on it, really is based around smoothness. Even when we looked at the 16th notes coming from the guitar, either in the opening idea, I think it was the second riff the guitar played, or when the guitar goes into that solo mode, it's these very light picks. If you look, there's not a lot of furiousness. It's not a lot of quick picking or harsh picking. It's very smooth, right? Really going for that light attack. And a lot of that kind of goes along with the somberness of the vibe here. This is not a moment for anger or wrath or aggression, or punctuation. It's just somber. It's melancholic. It's it's lacking of energy. It's being drained. And the best way to showcase that musically is to remove a lot of the harshness from attacks. So yeah, I wonder how often the drummer utilizes mallets in this band. But at least for this song in particular, oh, it's even called The Departure. Well, that checks out. um, the mallets though, they work particularly well here, even with the cymbal rolls or cymbal hits. Very few, if any, rolls in here. Usually isolated hits. Um, you don't get the that initial K sound with then the shimmer after it. It is more of just the shimmer, right? You're putting energy into the cymbal. You're moving it, causing it to vibrate, but you're not striking it violently. Or I should say, our drummer isn't striking it violently. It isn't these really big hand movements. They're very soft, very slower paced. And again, we're using a soft mallet to help absorb the impact there, so that you get the movement, the delivery of kinetic energy from the arm and by proxy the stick or mallet in this case into the cymbal, so it can vibrate and create its sound, but we're not doing so harshly. So yeah, just I had to pull that up. It's a very interesting part. And like I mentioned, it's just not something we see in metal too often, because metal tends to be about the aggression. You don't want to soften things up. So it makes sense that a lot of drums use drumsticks rather than metal brushes or mallets or anything else that a drummer might have on them. If you ever look at it's very cool. If you ever get a chance, you go see a jazz show or something, there's going to be a stick bag that the drummer hangs somewhere near them, because a jazz drummer is going to switch sticks and mallets and brushes throughout the set. But it's really neat and interesting to go over there and check out and see all the stuff that they bring. It is a smorgasbord of stuff. Whereas, you might see a stick bag for a metal drummer, but it's all drumsticks in case one breaks, because that's how hard they're playing their kit. So yeah, like I said, you ever get a chance, just check it out. You see a jazz drummer, they probably have an assortment of different mallets and stuff, because they have they typically play different styles, different songs. They need different attacks or textures and stuff like that. Just something we don't see too often in metal. Um, we got to talk about tempo, right? So the song starts out pretty slow. What did I say? 55, I think, is where we started, which was just kind of bonkers. Um, because that's where we ended yesterday. I said, I wonder if we're gonna listen to anything that gets slower than yesterday's. I don't even remember what the band was called. Oh, Conan, because we had that massive retardando at the end that brought us down to like 50-ish. And today this band just drops in and says, "Well, what if we just start at 50?" So that was interesting. But then we played around with it, right? We went up, we went down, we did what felt like half times. We had a 70 moment in there, we had an 80 moment. And the 80 moment, you know what? I think it was a 70 moment, like 75. They actually went to a halftime feel where the drummer accented every other beat instead of every beat. So you could actually perceive that if you didn't want to say, hey, it's 75 in halftime. You could say that it was that 48, give or take, which would be the lowest of the week so far. Um, but more importantly than just saying they have all these slow tempos, is their ability to fall back into a tempo. The guitar solo is always played at 88. Anytime the guitar went to that moving eighth note idea, we shifted up to 88. It happened twice in the track, if I remember correctly. What's interesting is both times we landed right on 88. It is kind of wild. That's not to say that it's inhuman or anything like that. Some people just have really great internal clocks, internal metronomes, whatever you want to call it. But it is, to me, impressive anyways to just kind of see that happen in real time. especially from the guitarist, because I do believe the guitarist kind of led that section. The drummer seemed to follow the guitarist's lead, primarily because the drummer is playing a fourth of as many notes as the guitarist is at that moment. So the guitar definitely takes lead at the moment. But just, one beat you're doing 50 and the next you're doing 88. Like 88 exact. That's the thing too, is because, in a live setting like this, most people can't tell the difference between 88 and 89, 88 and 90, 88 and 86. It really, for me, I think it's usually about 10 BPM differences that I can start to feel. Anything other than that is so minute. In fact, there's a lot of songs out there that might shift up the BPM by 5 when we move from a verse into a chorus, just to give the chorus a little bit more electricity, a little bit more momentum. Most people don't even pick it up. I don't even pick it up. 5 is so small. Especially when you're talking about faster songs, 130, 140, 150. You're talking about such a small percentage of an increase now that it's almost imperceivable unless you know that you need to be looking for it. So the fact that, what I'm saying here is that when they go to the solo section, humans are fallible. Fallible is the word I want. We're not perfect, right? So especially in a setting like this at such a slow tempo, it would not be out of character for the second solo section to maybe be 90 or 84 or something around 88, but not right on 88 again. That was just kind of remarkable. Just really has that dialed into the muscle memory. I think there was something else I wanted to say about tempo, but it is slipping my mind, and honestly, just the sheer precision throughout this. I mean, there were a couple of times when I was like, oh, are they speeding up or slowing down? But honestly, I think some of that was just in my head. Except the guitar solo. I kept feeling like they were speeding up, and then they were. So I don't know what's going on there. It's something I got to go back and check out. But yeah, just the raw precision is just phenomenal. Vocals are interesting. And the vocals are interesting here. It's pitched. I could make out a melody. It doesn't move a lot. We're talking about maybe 4 or 5 whole steps tops, half of a scale, half of an octave tops, like I said, for the width of notes that our vocalist utilizes through the entire song. But there is perceivable pitch coming out of it that is obviously paired with this extreme slow crackle. In fact, this is interesting too. I didn't pick this up. This is a slow song. We've listened to slow songs. We've listened to slow songs with growls, but the growls have never been slow too. The space between each of the fry pops is audible, right? I think his were even slower than that. Like I could hear each individual pop. It wasn't like they were overlapping, but it was still pretty constant. And his wasn't. He has so much control over his false chord to really create this a slow growl. But it was almost like a compression layer on top of vocals because, like I said, there is pitch in there too. Whereas when I just made that fry sound, I did not put any pitch in there at all. I don't know that even I could. I'm not going to attempt it my first time on a camera. I'll do that in private, thank you, and then I'll show you guys the results later. um, but yeah, so a slow growl for a slow song. This is bonkers. Um, yeah. I don't know that I have anything else to add. It's just kind of a wild vocal style. And then I guess the organ. It's an interesting touch, especially given that they allowed it to have an extended solo section there in the middle. Just kind of adds into the funeral vibes, I think. It's very theatric, very moody. The sound is very melancholic. Well, also sinister. I mean, that specific organ tone has been used in a couple of different ideas as far as pop culture goes, but sinister and sad seem to be the two predominant ones. And I'm going to go with sad on this one, just because it's called The Departure, because everything else feels funeral-y. Um, but yeah, it works very well in this context. Um, and going back to the theatric idea, the dude dresses like someone in an opera, which just adds to the theatricality of it all. Um, yeah, just an interesting track from start to finish. As usual with these slower ones, just not for me, but I can't say I've heard anything like this before. Not in its totality. Individually, I've heard, some of these concepts, but I don't think I've heard them combined like this. Let's get into some lyrics here. There's not a lot. How come are you here? 2 decades since nightfall. The night was supposed to be forever, the dark was said to last. The wine of departure, a potion bitter at first, shall one leave a mark or be a mark oneself? To depart is to return, to leave is to stay, it is said. To decide is to hesitate. Next decide will wait for me. Oh, next decade will wait for me. So it seems two people made a decision to split ways. Um, they had a final drink together, the wine of departure. Um, but the other person came and found our narrator again, and our narrator is very confused. Um, 20 years later, it seems, 2 decades since nightfall. It was supposed to be forever. Instead, it was only 20 years. And he says, "What are you doing here? How come are you here?" And then there's some philosophical musings. To depart is to return, to leave is to stay, to decide is to hesitate. So next decade will wait for me. The bridge says, "A new night will fall like a backward dawn, a new dark will rise like an inverted sun, yet one will not depart." Interesting. Verse 2, "How come am I here? 10 years after midnight, the night was said to be forever, the dark was said to last, the wine of departure, a potion sweet with time. Shall one leave a mark or be a mark oneself? To depart is to return, to leave is to stay, to decide is to hesitate. Next decade will wait for me." The outro is, "I will be here then and everything will be true." Yeah, I don't know. Kind of goes over my head. I mean, I could kind of force a reading into this of someone who has passed maybe 20 years ago. They buried them, and maybe they had, they drank to this person, right? Pour one out for my homies kind of idea. That's when they had their wine of departure, and it was bitter at first. But see, I don't know where to take this. The theatricality of the song kind of leads me into a supernatural era vibe, where maybe the ghost of this person comes back 20 years later. But it could also just be about memories and not being able to move on. Or maybe reaching a point in time when all they can do is look back on when this person was here. In which case, we do have the melancholy and the reluctance to move forward. All of that baked into the music itself, shining through in the lyrics here. So some of this does go over my head, but I do feel like that is probably in the right direction of where they're going with the lyrics. But as usual, those are just my thoughts on Skepticism's The Departure. This is where y'all come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, please do so. Above the comment section is a description box. In there is a link for Linktree, which takes you to this menu right here. Has links for everything related to the channel. You can follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, support the channel through Patreon, pick up some merch, and so much more. Go ahead and check it out. There's a ton of links in there. Above that, if you could like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, we have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, I'll be back 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll be continuing on with Gotta Go Slow Week, and we'll do another special selection tomorrow. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.